Okay, so in this final lesson on layers, I just want to talk about some of the different ways of working with layers that'll make your life easier and those little gotchas that will sneak up on you every now and then when you're working with layers. So first off, here I've got an image that, like in the last lesson, I've got just some text with some layer styles applied to it, as you can see right here. And one thing I want to talk about is locking the transparency. Now, if I were to take my paintbrush, and you notice I've got the same green color set as my foreground color, if I just go in here and start painting on this layer, you'll notice that it's filling in pretty much anywhere I paint. And you'll notice also that the layer style is updating as well. Because the layer style is a live effect, it's also going to redraw as I add pixels to this layer. But let's say, for instance, I wanted to be able to paint on these letters and not go outside the lines in a sense. Well, not coloring outside the lines has never been easier. Here we have these lock settings here, and this very first one is called the lock transparency. So if I turn off my background layer, you notice that this text layer is on its own layer against a transparent background. If I go ahead and click on this and lock the transparency, if I take the brush tool as I did, and let's go ahead and change the color. I'm just going to click right on that foreground swatch, and it will bring up the color picker. And I'm going to talk about color selections a little bit later, but I'm just going to go in here, I'm going to grab this blue color here. And again, I'm going to go in here and paint on those letters. But notice I'm staying within the visible area of this layer. It's not going outside the transparency because we have the transparency locked. It's keeping that place intact. So I can paint freely on there, even outside the lines, and it's only going to affect my visible areas. So that's locking the transparency, and there's other features as well. This icon will lock the painting features, so it won't allow me to paint at all, but I can move the object around if I like. This next item does just the opposite. It doesn't allow me to move the object. You'll see a little warning pop up, but it will allow me to paint inside there, as you can see right there. And this very last item basically locks the entire layer. It won't allow me to move it or paint on it or do anything. So if you've got a number of layers open and you want to keep that layer visible but not necessarily modify it in any way, that's what you would want to do, is go ahead and lock the layer. Now I'm going to jump over to this first image we were dealing with and just show you a couple other things. Now, when you're managing multiple layers, you can certainly rearrange the layers any way you like. Let's say I wanted to take this frame layer and reposition it somewhere else in the layer order. You simply grab it and move it around your layer order, and the line between the layers will highlight as a little dark line there. When you release, it will reposition the layer and you'll be able to move on. Now, if you wanted to move multiple layers, let's say I wanted to move both of these layers that contain the frame, you simply select one layer, hold down the Shift key, and then click directly on the other layer. Now they're both highlighted, and now you can just click and drag and move them both at the same time. Now, another aspect of layers is being able to generate selections from them. Well, let's say, for instance, that I wanted to generate a selection based on the shape of this frame on this layer. Well, all you need to do is simply hold down the Command or the Control key and then simply click directly on the layer preview. As you can see, my cursor changes. It adds a little selection icon there. When I click on it, it will load that layer as a selection. So if I wanted to isolate changes to this, I can simply load it as a selection, or in fact lock the transparency as I did before. And you don't have to be selected on a specific layer to load it as a selection. Let's say I'm highlighted on this frame layer here, but I want to load the image that's inside of it as a selection. Well, all I need to do is just do the same thing. Hold down the Command or Control key, click directly on it, and it will load it as a selection. And of course, up here at the top of the layers panel, you'll notice that we have those same opacity and fill dialogues that you saw in the layer styles earlier, where this one will affect the overall opacity of the layer, while this one will only affect what's on the layer, and if it has a layer style, it will completely remain visible. Now, one last aspect about layers or objects on your layers I want to talk about. I'm going to jump back over to this setting here. Let's say you've created an element on your layers, and let me unlock that. And say it's positioned up here, and you want to align it maybe perhaps to the center of your document. Well, alignment is really easy inside Photoshop. I'm going to go under the Select menu. Let's say I want to center this text based on the overall image area. Well, I'm going to go under the Select menu and go down here and choose All. And you'll notice that it does, in fact, select the entire document, the marching ants around the outer edge. And you'll notice that in my options right here, if I have the Move tool selected, in the options right here, I've got a number of Align tools. And here's our vertical alignment rather. I'm just going to click that once, and you'll notice that it goes ahead and drops it in the middle vertically. If you move down the order here, we get this horizontal center here. So just clicking on those documents, and it does that based on the selection. So if I reposition this over here, and let's say instead of selecting the entire document, I just make a selection of a very small area. Well, when I do that same alignment, click here and then click there, it's going to do it based on that currently selected area. So just know that alignments inside Photoshop work based on the currently selected area, whether it's the entire document or a very small part of it. Okay, one final aspect about layers I want to talk about, I'm going to jump back over to this other layered image here, is merging layers together. So let's say I've got these two frame layers and I like the way they look, and I know I'm not going to edit them anymore, and I've got a considerable number of layers in my document and I want to minimize them considerably. You can simply go into the flyout menu and go down here and choose merge down, and you'll see that those two layers have now been combined into one. And you can do that with multiple layers. Notice that I have this one layer selected and it's only going to merge one down. Well, if I shift click on several layers and do that same thing, it will merge all of those layers together. So whether you have one layer selected or several, choosing that merge command will merge those layers together. Now, when you are done with your image and you have created a file that's got multiple layers, I can't stress enough that you're going to want to save your original layered file. When you are ready to print or output it for whatever reason is when you're going to want to do something called flattening your image. And I encourage you to always save your layered file. When you are ready to flatten your image, I would do this. Simply go into the image menu and go down here to duplicate. And then it will generate an exact duplicate of your image. And then you can go down into the flyout menu here and choose flatten image. And you'll notice that it basically crushes it all down into one convenient layer that's ready to be outputted and do whatever you need it to do. But as I mentioned, you always want to make sure that you're saving a layered version of your file. So that covers layers pretty much in general, or just in a very basic sense. As I mentioned earlier, Matt Kloskowski has a course on the Kelby training site covering layer essentials. He also has a book on layers, and as I mentioned, it is a complex subject, so there's an entire book on it, and I hope that these short lessons here have given you a better understanding about how layers work and will help your work a little bit. But I do encourage you to dig deeper and learn more about layers, because there's so many more things going on in there. Now, there's one more aspect of layers we're going to get into a little bit later in this course, and that's something called adjustment layers. But we're going to continue on to the next lesson.